Welcome to Money Law. I am Professor Coinstein. You know the story of the Knights Templar. Crusader warriors, holy men with swords, protectors of pilgrims, right? Wrong. That is the marketing, the real. Untold story is that the Templars were the world's first true multinational conglomerate, the creators of the global banking system, and they were richer than almost every king in Europe combined. This is not a story about treasure maps or the Holy Grail. This is about power finance, and how a group of warrior monks developed a business model so advanced that modern banks still use its foundational principles today, and then how that wealth became their greatest weakness, leading to one of history's most dramatic financial shutdowns. Imagine travelling from London to Jerusalem in the 12th century. It was a journey of thousands of miles, taking months, through forests, mountains, and hostile territories. If you were a wealthy pilgrim, how did you carry your money? You carried gold and silver, meaning you were guaranteed to be robbed, kidnapped, or murdered. Dangerous logistical problem, and immediately monetized it. Their initial capital was meagre, just 9 knights in the beginning, in the year 1119, operating out of a wing of the royal palace in Jerusalem. But within a decade, their network began to spread, and the money started to pour in. What they invented was the letter of credit, or what was then called the depositio. This single piece of paper changed the world. Here is how it worked. A pilgrim would deposit his wealth, say 1,000 gold coins, at a Templar preceptory in London or Paris. The Templars would give the pilgrim a coded, cryptographic receipt, a piece of parchment that was essentially a medieval cheque. The receipt described the deposit amount, but it used a special cipher, a secret code, that only a Templar master at another location could decipher. The pilgrim travelled safely, carrying only a scrap of paper rather than literal pounds of gold. When he arrived in Jerusalem, or any major city in between, he presented the receipt, and the local Templar master would pay him the equivalent amount, minus a small but profitable fee for the transaction. This fee, the cost of protection and transfer, was their first major revenue stream. It was a fee for safety. A medieval insurance policy, think of it. They were essentially running the first Western Union, PayPal, and Brink's security service simultaneously. Their network was the key. By the year 1300, the order was not just in the Holy Land. They had preceptories, fortified, administrative, financial centres in virtually every major European nation, including France, England, Portugal, Spain, Germany, and even Scotland. That meant they could move money without physically moving gold. If 1,000 coins were deposited in London, the London preceptory simply had to record a ledger entry. The Jerusalem preceptory would pay out from its local reserves, and the debt would be settled internally across the Templar ledger. This internal ledger was the foundation of the modern correspondent banking network. This system allowed them to constantly invest the reserves in the depositing location, essentially creating liquidity and generating additional profits while your money was on its journey. They became so trusted that European nobles and kings, including the King of France, started using Templar preceptories as their own royal treasuries. Why? Because the Templar houses were inviolable. Attacking a Templar house meant invoking the wrath of the entire church and the most powerful military force in the world. This massive financial activity required immense organization. The Templars developed sophisticated accounting practices, running audits, maintaining detailed dual entry books, and even creating the first system of notarized contracts and legal documents to govern loans. Speaking of loans, their most lucrative service was lending. They were technically forbidden by church law from charging usury, excessive interest, but the Templars found a clever loophole. They would charge a fee for the security of the asset being put up as collateral, or a fee for the transfer of a non-monetary asset. They loaned enormous sums, for instance. In the late 13th century, the King of France, Philip IV, owed the Templars an astronomical sum, equivalent to over $200 million in modern terms, factoring in inflation and economic output. This debt gave the Templars massive political leverage. Their wealth came not just from pilgrims and kings, but from the immense land grants they received. They were not just a bank. They were one of the largest landowners in Europe, controlling vast tracts of land, vineyards, farms, and mills. This land generated a consistent, diversified passive income stream. They built huge fortified castles which served dual purposes, military bases and highly secure vault centres. The famous Temple Church in London was not just a place of worship, it was the epicentre of English banking for centuries. The Order also ran its own massive shipping fleet in the Mediterranean. They managed imports and exports, moving grain, livestock and other goods between their territories. Further cementing their status as a global trade and logistics giant, their vast economic power led them to pioneer another crucial concept: sovereign debt management. They managed the royal tax collection for numerous monarchs, giving them unparalleled insight into the financial health of entire kingdoms. Their annual income by the late 1200s is estimated to have been so large it could equal the combined gross domestic product of several small European countries today. This level of consolidated wealth was simply unprecedented in the medieval world. Now, let us talk about the downfall. The Templars' biggest client, the biggest debtor, was King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair. Philip was obsessed with money, or, more accurately, obsessed with not paying his debts. The Order, S-Power, became an existential threat to Philip. He wanted their money, and he wanted their political immunity gone. His plan was brutally simple and shockingly effective: a hostile takeover of a multinational financial firm using military force on Friday, the 13th of October, 1307. Yes, that is where the superstition comes from. Philip launched a simultaneous, coordinated raid across all Templar preceptories in France. He had secretly prepared a warrant for the arrest of every Templar in the country. The charge was not financial. It was heresy, blasphemy, idol worship, spitting on the cross. These were allegations designed to justify the seizure of their assets and bypass any legal protections they had. It was a public relations smear campaign of epic proportions. The knights, who had faced down armies in the Crusades, were caught completely off guard in their administrative roles. The arrests allowed Philip to immediately seize the Order's substantial real estate, their gold reserves and most importantly, their meticulous financial records. The Templar Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was tortured and eventually burned at the stake 7 years later. In 1314, his execution effectively ended the Order, and the Pope officially dissolved the Knights Templar soon after. Philip IV's goal was simple: debt cancellation and asset acquisition. He wanted the Templars, billions, and the ability to wipe his own massive debt slate clean. This was the largest sovereign default in history up to that point. The fallout was immense. The disappearance of the world's most trusted international bank caused a ripple effect of financial instability across Europe. Without the Templars, international trade and pilgrimage finance ground to a halt. Think of it this way: the King of France just defaulted on his loan and unilaterally shut down the global banking system. This event was a catastrophic blow to the developing global economy, far worse than any modern bank failure like Lehman Brothers. But here is the twist. Philip did not get all the Templar wealth. The Knights, masters of logistics and finance, anticipated trouble shortly before the arrests. Many Templar leaders, especially those outside of France, started quietly moving their largest liquid assets. Templar ships loaded with treasure, gold, silver, and perhaps their most valuable asset, their internal ledger books, vanished from European ports. The missing wealth became the basis for every Templar treasure legend ever told. The Order's remaining assets were largely transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, another rival military order, in an attempt by the Pope to control the immense wealth. However, the Hospitallers only received a fraction of the full valuation. The Templars' impact, however, survived their disappearance. The letters of credit, the sophisticated accounting, the concept of a network of secure, politically immune centres for wealth storage, these ideas were immediately adopted by emerging Italian banking families, like the Medici family, who came to dominate Renaissance finance, inherited and refined many of the Templars' techniques, formalizing the system into the modern banking operations we recognize today. The banking DNA was directly passed down. The Templars also left a lasting mark on real estate. The property they held in France and England often remained Temple property, and their extensive land holdings are why you still see so many streets and buildings named Temple in historical European cities. Their story serves as a stark historical warning. when a single private entity becomes more powerful and financially immune than the ruling government. That government will inevitably find a way to dismantle it. Philippi Thief proved that political power always trumps financial power, at least in the short term. The legacy is in your wallet. The convenience of a modern debit card, the security of a global bank wire, the trust you place in an international financial institution. All of these systems have their operational roots planted firmly in the 12th century ingenuity of the Knights Templar. They were not just crusaders. They were financial innovators who built a vast, integrated network across 2 continents. They understood that in business, trust is the highest value currency, and they leveraged that trust into absolute global dominance. For a time, the Templars were the single most solvent, organized, and wealthy entity in the Western world, the ultimate example of military efficiency meeting financial innovation. The order was destroyed by greed, but its financial technology was simply too valuable to forget. It is a fascinating example of how a startup with 9 founders and a novel solution to a massive logistical problem grew into a world-changing enterprise only to be crushed when its net worth exceeded the net worth of its most powerful customer. So, the next time you use a credit card abroad or worry about your country, national debt. Remember the warrior monks who pioneered the entire system. They are the ghost in the machine of global finance. The Templars' downfall reminds us that every financial innovation carries with it a new risk, in their case. The risk of having an extremely jealous king as a client. The lesson is simple: diversification is key, and never lend money to a monarch you cannot depose. That is it for this episode of Money Law. If you learned something, smash that like button and let me know in the comments which forgotten financial scandal I should dive into next. Until then, stay solvent and watch your back.